All
Okay,
right.
hi everybody, and a very warm welcome to Dr. Lawrence Berridge, who's an educational psychologist based in Islington. He works for Islington Borough Council as part of the education department. I contacted Lawrence via LinkedIn, so I'd never met him before. I just looked for an educational psychologist who is young and working in Islington. I found someone who went to the same university many years after me. And Lawrence was really keen on the idea of just sharing his journey, how he became an educational psychologist, what he really loves about it, and just telling us a bit more about it, because it's a lot less well known as a profession. Lots of students don't know it, but it's a fantastic career opportunity. So we're going to hand over to you, Lawrence, now. Thanks again for coming along.
Yeah, Lawrence, if I can just say two more things, tiny bit of housekeeping. Thank you, Antonia, for introducing Lawrence so lovely. The one thing I wanted to suggest, Lawrence, is that you basically just ignore the chat while talking, and I'll monitor the chat. And if something comes up or something is unclear, then you students, please just put it in there. And I will, if I think it's kind of, if I can't answer it or I think it's relevant, I would just interrupt you, Lawrence, and kind of alert you to that. But so I think for me, at least, it's very distracting if you have to monitor the chat, and often then I start thinking about these things and then I kind of lose my line of thought. And just for everyone, I think Lawrence will give a 30-minute presentation roughly. We never make it in time. It always takes a little bit longer. And then we have time for Q&A. So if you feel like your question can wait, just wait till the Q&A. But if you feel like it can't, then just put it in the chat, and I'm always happy to answer. And I think Antonia is also always on the chat, okay? Lawrence, on cue, I think his internet froze. Lawrence, are you still with us?
I'm back.
I'm back, yeah.
I've disappeared 3 times already and I haven't even started yet.
Okay. All right, take it away, please.
Okay, I think I caught everything you said, Andreas, before it cut out. So that's great. Thank you very much. Well, thank you both, Andreas and Antonia, for the lovely introductions. I qualified as an educational psychologist 1.5 years ago, so the fact that I'm being referred to as Dr. Berridge still seems very weird to me. And I'm sure all my friends, if they heard me being referred to as Dr. Berridge, would think, that guy really, doctor? But no, thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be here. So let me present my slides here, and let's expect that it's going to cut out a couple more times because I think that it might well do. So yeah, I've kind of titled this presentation "How to Become an Educational Psychologist," but it's by no means the one and only way to become one. I'm kind of reflecting more on my own experiences of becoming and learning to become an educational psychologist, but everyone will have their own experiences that they would bring if they would be interested in applying and have their own route perhaps. So this is the route that I took and got into that profession, but there may be lots of different ways, which I can explain along the way. So starting with that kind of in mind, my own experience to get to the work, to get to the role where I am, is like Antonia said, we studied at the same university. I studied at the University of Kent, psychology undergraduate degree, and then following my graduation, had a bit of a predictable existential crisis. What do I do now? I've had education consistently up to this point. I don't know what to do with my life. Maybe some of you are kind of feeling that, wondering the same sort of thing. What comes next? So I took a job. I kind of moved back in with my parents and took a job working as a dental insurance administrator. But looked for something then a bit further afield and looking to have a few adventures. So went out to South Korea to teach English. And that was kind of my first real experience of working within the education sector. And then came back to the UK after that, after a bit of traveling as well, to work as a tutor in West London, did a few other odd jobs, and then learned about educational psychology for the first time through LinkedIn. I just was kind of searching around and came across this role.
All right, I think we lost Lawrence. Lawrence, you're back?
Hey, I'm back.
Keep going.
I don't know where you might have lost me, but I'm wondering, would either of you be able to present? Because I think it's presenting the presentation which causes the problem. That's going to be a bit of a nightmare.
Maybe I can have a go at it, but just bear with me because I'm going to.
I think give me one sec. I can do that. It's no problem, Antonia.
Okay, all right.
Yes. I think, Lawrence, do you just want to turn off your PowerPoint for the moment and just talk?
Yeah,
and
sure.
Then I will just quickly find the right spot. Okay. Oh no. Okay. Lawrence. Why are they? Oh, now Lawrence is completely gone. I see myself. Antonia, do you have this? Oh, there you are.
Keeps happening. I'm back again.
Okay.
I'm really sorry about this. It's never normally this bad.
No.
I'm just looking at your presentation, Lawrence, that you sent a while ago, I think.
Antonia, do you have this presentation handy? Then you could just put it in the chat, or I think I don't know why.
I'm just also. Oh yes, just bear with me.
All right, I think I got the slides. Don't worry about it. I think
me too. Should I pop it in the chat?
I think I got them.
Okay.
And I would just start them now and then share them. Okay.
Whilst you set it up, shall I keep going?
Yes, just keep going, and I think we're about to. Yes, please do so.
Okay, great. Where did I stop last? Where did you hear me up until last time?
I think you said you'd gone off to Korea, and you'd had your exploration. You just discovered what educational psychology was on LinkedIn. You'd never heard of it before.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah. So I got a role as an assistant psychologist, which I got through LinkedIn it's actually through a private company. There are assistant psychology roles you can get through local authorities as well. But I got it through that. And learned about what educational psychology was for the first time, worked in a school supporting young people, supporting teachers, running groups, supporting children's learning and well-being and emotional needs through different interventions. And
can everyone see the slides? If you can
yes, very clear. Maybe Lawrence,
I can see him.
Like the sort of COVID professors, you can say next slide to help Andreas along.
What an honor that I get to do that. So and then after working as an assistant psychologist, applied for the doctorate. I can say a bit more about the course and the specifics around that a bit later, but I studied on the doctorate in East London, University of East London, for 3 years. And now I'm a practitioner, psychologist, educational psychologist, working just up the road, in fact, from I believe your campus, not too far away, on Upper Street, as an ed psych. So we may all see each other around in the future when it's possible to be more out and about. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I've kind of, could you go back one, please? So in kind of the spirit of the questions coming up along the way, I've tried to anticipate some of them and have kind of structured it around that. But of course, there may be more questions later and along the way, which is great. But some of the questions that might be asked along the way are, what does an ed psych actually do? And so I would say the day-to-day role can vary, but generally the activities involve consultation, which means meeting with parents and teachers and really any people that are involved in supporting young people. You set up a meeting essentially with them to explore what's going well, what are some concerns, what support's in place, starting to kind of unpick the situation a little bit, ask questions, and try and think about a way forward for their support and try and understand really what's going on for them. You know, I'm sure in your courses at the moment, you're thinking about lots of different areas of psychology, like cognitive psychology, developmental psychology. These areas I've kind of we draw from in trying to understand what might be going on in understanding the relationship between kind of the kind of what can explain children's behavior and learning, and when there are difficulties, where might that be coming from, which we can explore through consultation.
So Lawrence, can I just check, do you tend to specialise with primary school kids or with secondary at the moment?
I have an allocation of many schools, primary schools, secondary schools, even nursery schools, or one nursery school. Sometimes we might work with sixth form colleges, we might work with special schools that support children with autism, or for children who attend pupil referral units if they're excluded from schools, any other children who may have moderate learning difficulties, really any, within the kind of legislation, educational psychologists can support young people up to the age of 25. So anyone really who's in education who may need some additional support, we help to understand what their needs are and ensure that that support is in place. Yeah, we might do some assessments as well, more kind of face-to-face assessments, exploring cognition or children's and young people's views, or around their kind of social, emotional, mental health needs. Again, really whatever is shared as concerns that we want to find out more about. There's different assessments that can tell us more. We might go into classrooms and observe. We might do training for teachers or for school staff or for other professionals, depending on kind of what comes up really. We might do some whole school project work, thinking about the kind of school systems and how those might influence the school functionality, and the way that sometimes a young person's needs can be considered as well as being kind of about their individual needs. It exists within the context of the school. So sometimes we can kind of, with our hopefully critical eye, but friendly critical eye, identify maybe this school needs a bit of support around this, and we can change some of the systems and how this works. So we can do some work with them around that. As well as some intervention, kind of more therapeutic or educational support interventions to support them. But in bottom left in the black band there is emails, admin, and team meetings, because no job is complete without a bit of that. Next slide, please. And yeah, ed psychs might work with young people directly, but often I find actually I tend to spend more of my time working with adults. So I was in a meeting just recently, in fact, before coming here, and had a meeting with a head teacher and different professionals, including children, adolescent mental health service professional as well, and teachers, a few other people, to start to unpick a situation and plan the next steps in assessment for a young person. So we really work with all people in schools and communities to support and understand young people's needs, and the needs of schools sometimes too. But you have a bit of autonomy in the best way to work, depending on the situation and the person and what is the context. So it's nice to have that flexibility to make an impact in your role in the way that you feel will be best.
Lawrence, could you give us, I don't know if this is, could you give us a case I'm trying to kind of like, can you, I don't know, I mean, obviously by not revealing any names or anything like that, but what would be like a situation? I always, educational psychologist, I feel like, is it about dyslexia, or I don't know, is it also like, what would be it? I mean, obviously there are no typical cases, but let's like, what would be a somewhat typical case that, yeah.
That's a good question. What just came to mind was a particular young person, but actually I'm aware that if we're in Islington, there may be some people here who might know some of the children even through descriptions. So I'm going to be a little bit vague, and I hope I'm still answering your question by doing that. But yeah, I guess a typical referral might be that, yeah, maybe a child there's some concerns around their literacy. So yeah, some concerns relating to dyslexia, or what is sometimes referred to as dyslexia. So start to understand that a bit more. You know, I might start the meeting by asking what people are hoping to get out of the meeting, where the concerns.
Okay, we just wait a moment. I think Lawrence always comes back.
Well, he has a pretty tough internet problems. He was
Yeah,
saying
you're back.
earlier, wasn't he?
Oh, good. All right.
It's helpful to say because I could see that you were both moving, so I didn't know that I'd dropped off. So I could have just been talking for ages, and no one could hear.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm really sorry that my internet isn't so
no
poor.
worries.
Just saying that they come in, you start the meeting trying to figure out what the concerns are, and then.
Yeah. So yeah, meeting in that kind of initial meeting, we would kind of ask parents and the school to fill out some initial information, have a meeting, start to unpick that. In fact, in that meeting, then we might decide, actually, it's quite clear that the school needs to do a little bit more, put in a bit more support in this area or that area. So that could be the involvement for now, and then we'll come back and review later. Or it might be that the school's saying, yeah, we've tried this, tried this, we're not seeing progress. So then it might be helpful actually to meet with the young person directly, get a sense of their views of themselves as a learner and of reading, and then possibly advise the school on a further bit of support. It really varies on the situation.
I can say something as well, actually, which might help. My family have really benefited from the services of an EdPsych. So in my family, there are lots of issues with learning differences. There is things like ADHD, autism, dyspraxia, dyslexia, and also other sort of, more unusual communication disorders that are less well known. And various people have actually sort of had concerns about children growing up. They're not developing in the way that other children are. They're not reaching what they call, the educational or developmental milestones. And at that point, you would contact your local authority or your health service, and or teachers would bring in an EdPsych to actually observe, just like Lawrence, in school, what's happening, how the child is interacting, etc. And then reports are done and plans are prepared to develop and monitor that child to help them achieve their academic potential. So I really have valued the services of an EdPsych, and various people in my family have, for all these different issues, and have made a huge difference.
Great, thank you, Antonia. That's really helpful to hear, and I think that it's really helpful to kind of hear about your own experiences of working with EdPsychs. And I'm really pleased to hear that that's kind of been beneficial for you and your family. Great, but yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, referrals could also relate to ADHD. Or autism-related needs. Increasingly seeing a lot of concerns around kind of behavior, but of course, behavior is just what we see in the external, and then internally that kind of emotions may relate to trauma or lots of other things that could relate to that kind of presentation of more, I guess we could say, kind of behavior which challenges. So again, the role might be to start to unpick that a bit, where that might be coming from, and thinking about supporting in terms of children's attachments with key adults like people at schools and such like. That I tend to find that increasingly so, there's more support requested around supporting children's mental health and well-being. Next slide. Thank you. So if at this point already you're kind of wondering, that sounds good, sign me up, then I would advise don't rush and develop curiosity and learn from experience. I'll kind of get onto that a bit later around like the application process if that's something that you want to find out more about. But generally, I think a lot of maybe higher those kind of further education courses around that, like after a degree, they move less from trying to get particular grades and show competencies in terms of your kind of academic ability only, moving more towards your experiences, what you've learned from the world. Well, especially applied courses like this to become a psychologist. Maybe a PhD is much more academic, but this kind of applied doctorate is more based on your experiences and working with people in the community. So I would say definitely gather some experience. If you're interested in working in schools, then definitely try to find some experience working in schools, or in the community, much the same. And in the interviews, they'll be thinking about they'll be asking you questions around your own experiences and what you learned from that, as well as perhaps some academic knowledge, but more so reflections from your experiences. But yeah, as a kind of expectation, they look for a 2-1 or a first degree usually, or a conversion course or a master's if you don't have a psychology undergraduate. But there are some courses as well that also accept 2 degrees, and I think that's because again they're most focused on applicants that have had experiences that are relevant, and just people that will be the right kind of personality, the right kind of have the right kind of skills for being a psychologist that aren't just academic ones. So they look for a minimum of 1, but usually more than that, full-time experience working with young people or working in communities in some kind of helping or healthcare profession. And interestingly, a teaching qualification used to be a requirement, but it's not anymore. And I think that's because the skills for being a teacher and a psychologist maybe overlap in many ways, but one is not necessarily a prerequisite for the other. And it can then therefore move some people who were teachers who then become psychologists end up just becoming advice givers, and you don't want to do that always. You want to ask people to come up with solutions and ideas for themselves rather than telling them. But I'm aware that I've just said don't give advice, but yeah, and then my first point is my advice is this. So what can I say?
Okay, next slide.
Please. Great. So yeah, in terms of the application process, if you did want to think about this, perhaps in a few years after having a bit more experience. I mean, of course, if you've had 1 year working in a school already as part of a sandwich course or in previous times, then there would be no need to delay or to hold back. But again, I think it's useful to get a lot of experience and learn from that over time. When you want to apply, the Association for Educational Psychologists will support applications. You have to pay a little fee, and then you can apply to there are 4 courses in London and 13 courses across the country, with 203 places in total, and you can apply for 3 courses each year. During the course, over 3 years,
Lawrence, could I ask you one quick question? I think that one educational psychologist I was talking about, because I think you get paid, right, during this? This is like a...
Yeah, you do get paid. I think I wrote it on one of the slides that comes up a bit later.
Oh, I see. I was just wondering, because it's like at the moment there might be a chance that this might change. Did you hear anything about that, or is that just like okay, you're saying no? Okay, this is good. All right, so you're still getting paid. We'll talk later about this. Yes.
I've not heard any rumors about that, but it could be true. I hope not. It's possible to self-fund as well if that's if that's an option that you would be able to consider, but it can cost a lot of money.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So during the training, you start your first year with a lot of taught modules. You, in your first few weeks of the course, you start by thinking about your own personal values, which I thought was really interesting. If you're learning to be a psychologist, you have to kind of a bit know yourself as well and what's important for you. And so you start by doing a bit of work around that. You start to develop more knowledge around those different areas: consultation, assessment, some thinking around observation, lots of different kind of factors that might relate to that role. You spend a bit of time doing placement, mostly observing, and then starting to do a bit of work yourself. And then largely in year 2 and year 3, you spend your time on placement, and you get a high level of support on placement from both your university and on your placement, where you kind of, essentially it's like an apprenticeship, learning to do the job with a lot of support along the way.
So just to check, Lawrence, in year 1, you're not out on placement in year 1. You're observing and things, but you're not actually on placement as such. Is that right? Or you are on placement?
Sorry, I should clarify. Yeah, you have placements from years 1 to 3, but in year 1, the expectation is that you observe a bit more. So you might observe other psychologists having consultations, or you might do more more hands-off activities, and then you slowly build up in year 1 more activities that you do, more hands-on, more consultations or assessments. And then in year 2 and year 3, you're essentially autonomous, but you get a lot of support along the way. You have a lot of assignments to write as well. So no university course is complete without some assignments. So you have a couple of those, but again, they're focused a bit more on your own experiences, as well as things like research into different areas that you kind of mix together. And in your 3rd year, you complete a research thesis as well. So there's a real emphasis on research and evidence-based practice, thinking about how psychological research relates to the kind of practice of the real world and how they meet, because there can sometimes be that mismatch between the theory and the reality. So trying to make that fit together in a meaningful way is really important, I think, to understand as a practitioner, someone who's there having meetings and thinking about people's everyday lived experiences. So you do still do a kind of research thesis where you are exploring a topic in real depth and become an expert in that area, as well as developing your research skills along the way. So it's kind of like a combination of doing a taught. I always think it's like a taught master's, where you learn about the role and the topic. A PhD where you do a research project, and kind of like an apprenticeship where you learn how to do the job. So it's a bit of all 3 in one doctorate course, which I quite liked, because you get to do a bit of everything. When I was a kid, I always used to go for pick and mix rather than just get one individual thing, because I like a bit of everything. So maybe that says something about me that I chose that role, therefore.
All right, great. Could you, I don't know if you say, right, do you know that the different programs in the different universities have a little bit of a different flavor? I know that for clinical psychology, some of the programs are more, for instance, King's College, in my understanding, is very kind of hardcore, quantitative, empirical, and they really, really emphasize that. And other programs are a little bit more, we don't have a problem with qualitative research, which is rarer and more rare. I think you have a strong qualitative stance. So I just wanted to is this something that University of East London kind of allows? Is this how is this? Is there differences in flavors across these programs? I mean, obviously the structure will roughly be the same. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great point. There is some difference between the different courses. Well, I'd say some more subtle differences. Ultimately, there is a kind of curriculum that everyone has to adhere to some extent, or not curriculum, more like competencies that have to be met in order to become a practitioner psychologist that all courses will have to support you to develop. But in London, the University of East London, that does have more of an emphasis on qualitative research. And I think that's that it depends kind of on what you are interested in, but the quantitative research that's done more in education, I think, relies to much bigger projects that are kind of supporting to inform policy maybe, whereas a lot of qualitative research projects may be more helpful for schools to help them to explore a specific question. I suppose that's something that I missed from the top there, in those little colorful boxes, that sometimes you can do some research. It's a bit less common that either schools or the local authority will commission that. But actually, I did a little research project about young people's views of starting at when they're excluded and joining a pupil referral unit. What are their experiences of that? A little through a kind of qualitative questionnaire, and then we collected the views and shared that at a meeting, and helped to kind of inform some changes on that induction process. So I missed one of the strands. Can't believe it.
Fantastic, Lawrence. Just a quick clarification. I got a question via chat. I think I'm correct in assuming you need a bachelor and a year of experience, and theoretically that is enough to apply for the doctorate. You don't need a master's. You don't need anything else, right?
That's a good point. Yes, you don't need a master's. You don't need a master's necessarily. I think you might need, you need something called like, it was included on one of the earlier slides, but something like a chartered, oh, there it is, yeah. BPS, Graduate Basis for Chartered Membership, which is basically the BPS, British Psychological Society, saying that your course has, you know, enough psychology in it.
Our course is fine for that, luckily.
Yes, we do. Yes.
Yeah.
We pay dearly for that. I've realized I've written the word masters. That's a master's. Perhaps if you did a different undergraduate degree other than psychology, you might need to do a master's to have that graduate basis for chartered membership, to have enough psychology in your life. All right, fantastic. Okay, please carry on. Sorry for all the interruptions.
No, don't apologize. No, it's good. I've kind of put together the training based on what I think, but of course there's always going to be other stuff that comes up, so it's great. Yeah, next slide, please. So how do I get relevant work experience? Well, before even, if that's a question that's being asked, I'd say before that, I would even ask yourself, do you want a career in the helping professions? Do you want to do the kind of role that involves that kind of work? And, you know, also, much like we are asked to think at the start of our course around our own personal values, what would be your personal values and what's important for you? What do you want out of your career and out of your life? What do you want to spend the majority of your working life doing? You may well be asking yourself those questions already and having those conversations, but I think, yeah, there can be the kind of thought to get a career, get started, get going. Yep, I want to do that. That's the thing for me. But I think it's okay to challenge yourself and take a step back and wonder whether that is the right thing, if that's what you've thought already. And I suppose that's kind of what psychology is a bit about, like analyzing and starting to unpick the assumptions and thoughts and ideas that we might have. So, you know, fundamentally, I think it's okay to think about those over time. I would also say at this point, finishing your undergraduate, you know, apply for things that interest you and do what interests you as well. And I think in interviews, the interviewers for the course are also psychologists, so they'll know if you're lying. But yeah, they'll know if you are kind of genuinely interested in education, in well-being and mental health and learning and cognitive psychology, developmental psychology, applying psychology to real-world contexts. They'll know that. That'll be clear from just the way that you present yourself in general. So yeah, I think having that kind of, or cultivating that interest over time then is the preparation for the job interview, really, rather than reading through reams of paper and such like. And
there's
also,
oh, sorry, go on, Lawrence.
No, please go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, there's loads of work experience you can get, you guys, whilst you're at uni, even without doing a placement year or taking a year out, as Lawrence is talking about. you know, doing stuff like helping with a homework club, an after school club, and helping with homework, getting involved in a summer camp for young people, which involves, you know, personal development, fun stuff, maybe some educational stuff as well. Quite a lot of those run in London in the summer. Helping out, going to work, you know, volunteer once a week for an hour at a local primary school, for example, to support people with their reading, listening to children reading, anything, you know, being an assistant youth worker, helper, anything that shows you have an interest in children and young people and develops your ability to build rapport with them. Those sort of things would be a great thing to have on your CV. Do you agree, Lawrence?
I think that's a really good point. Yeah, I would definitely agree. Yeah, I think if I kind of think about my own experience at undergrad, I was a bit of a nerd and was in the library all the time, and I was putting a lot of pressure on myself to achieve certain grades, like high grades, whatever. And yeah, I think, you know, when I kind of take a step back, I think, you know, maybe, and I guess what you're left with when you do once you complete your degree, I think maybe it would have been nice to have done a bit more other activities, you know, here and abouts. I mean, I wasn't like in the library all the time, but, you know, I think that when you're applying for this course or you're thinking about this and just generally thinking about your experience at university, yeah, having that kind of profile of different things that you can do along the way will be really helpful. Of course, you know, we have everyone is experiencing COVID at the moment, which may make that a bit more difficult, but I think there will still be initiatives and things going that you can be involved with around that. And I guess I would say then, yeah, don't get too hung up on achieving a certain grade if this is the kind of career that you're thinking about. To take my advice, I'm not supposed to give advice, I won't give advice, but yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Antonia. Yeah, and so kind of building on that, yeah, so I think it's okay not to have your dream job after graduation. It's okay not to know what that is. Fundamentally, for psychology work, the key is applying psychology. So it's less important what you do and having like a ream of experience prior to an interview. The key thing is like what you've learned from it, you know, how you've gone about that, the thoughts you've had along the way, the learnings you've taken from that to kind of move forward. That's more important. And a lot of the time there have been people who've applied for the course who've been teachers for 20 years, who apply year on year on year and say the same things at interview and are rejected. Whereas there are some people who've worked in a school as a teaching assistant for 1 year and have really taken a lot from that experience. They've really reflected on it. It's caused them to, you know, they worked with a child with autism, they researched autism, they found out about this, they supported them in this way, they noticed it made a difference like this. That's the kind of person who's showing psychological thinking in the real world and learning from their experiences and then reflecting on it in an interview. So that's the kind of skills you'll be using in the role. So they would get on the course.
So teaching assistant, I think sometimes some of my students ask me that, is it okay? Sorry, I think my children go bananas behind me.
I heard him.
What did I want to say? Oh yeah, teaching assistant would be something where sometimes people are like, oh, what do I do for educational psychology? I think there are assistant educational psychologist positions as well, right? But I think you can also work as an TA and reflect on that. And just as you said, okay, fantastic. So this is not bad advice I'm giving. I'm just trying to make sure that okay, good.
Good advice. Yeah. Actually, when I was looking on LinkedIn, I saw that there was a lot of jobs that are geared towards psychology graduates. Actually, they specify psychology graduates because I think they're looking for people with that kind of, you know, fresh knowledge of psychology and are kind of keen and interested in applying that in real world settings in school contexts. So yeah, those could be something to look out for if anything about what I'm saying sounds interesting to you. Yeah, and yeah, psychologists work with people and communities. So as well as kind of academic experience, you know, your own personal experience from your own like childhood and your family, your experience where you grew up will kind of inform your work as a psychologist. But yeah, fundamentally it's working with people. So that's just as important as any academic abilities. So is there anything else you think I should know? You mentioned the money part, Andreas. Yeah, my understanding is that there is not any changes going to be happening to the bursary that's funded, fully funded, but there could well be rumblings about that. I'm all about the money. Yeah, well, why not? But yeah, I think it's a good thing that it is a funded bursary. Yeah, a funded course. Sorry, you need that money to live. I lived off of that money for 3 years. You know, it can be tricky to live off that amount in London, especially if there are lots of fun things going on in London. But yeah, like I said, I was a bit of a library nerd as well in my doctorate, so I also spent a lot of time there as well. Fundamentally, the top part there, I mentioned that there's 203 places every year, and probably some of you, much like when I was thinking about applying, were thinking, that's not many places. But you are as good as anyone else. You know, that teacher with 20 years of experience who shows up at the interview and says the same thing every time. You are just as good as them, you know, if not better, if you can reflect on your experiences, learn from that, and apply psychology. And in an interview setting, in a group interview setting, they may be quite motivated to put you down even because they feel like they have more experience, but you are as good as anyone else. Your knowledge and experience from your life, from your course, from your experiences in any work you might get are as good as anyone else's. So I would say if you are put off applying because you think you're not good enough, then you can think that if you want to, but I think you are as good as anyone else. There is, yeah, once you qualify, Andreas, you're all about the money. There's an expected salary of 38 to 60K. You can get more for more senior and principal positions, but that kind of amount is no secret. It's kind of public service work that's available, or that information is available for that role. So I thought I would share around that. But you can also get some different work. You can get some different work around you can work for a private company and possibly make some more money if you want to, but sometimes the private companies, well, I'm biased because I work for the public sector, but there are different factors to consider in private work as well. You know, fundamentally you want to make sure that any private company you work for is putting the needs of the young people in the community first over profit. But there are opportunities to work for private companies. There are opportunities to do different work on the side, like you can work as like expert witness roles and different kind of work seconded to different departments within a local authority, like the Youth Offending Service or speech and language teams, different teams you can work with as part of your role.
Yeah, I actually wanted to ask you a little bit about this because I think like some of the education psychologists I talked to, they mentioned that there's kind of a lot happening with respect to private companies, because it seems like that some schools also have basically kind of more agency over their own money and their own budgets, and they're willing to spend. I think one education psychologist, she tried to implement kind of like a meditation mindfulness training within schools, and she had kind of like on the side her little company doing that and then offering the service. And I felt like, I don't know, there's definitely some education psychologists that, for lack of better word, I think they were kind of like, they hustled a little bit, but they had kind of like a little private thingy here and a little private. And it seems like there's a lot of opportunity right now, at least out there, because it seems there's more money that is going around and can be distributed by the schools. Is that like a correct assessment?
Yeah, I know quite a few educational psychologists who have done things like that. You know, they've contacted schools privately and offered more specific work. I know an educational psychologist who does some similarly like mindfulness training with the school and has kind of agreed that work with the school directly. I know an EP who has a kind of educational psychology and coaching psychology company. So he offers services for coaching services for like teachers and head teachers, as well as doing the work as part of the educational psychologist role. And yeah, I think there are lots of different organizations out there. There's a lot of independent psychologists who are on the like a register for independent psychologists who may parents may want independent assessments that they can pay for. So that exists as well. You can kind of exist as your own company. You don't have to work with schools directly. I would say the majority of educational psychologists are employed by local authorities.
Could I ask one more question? I think I just got it in a chat. Just about the application. I mean, in my mind, right, there's like, if you apply for a clinical doctorate, you go towards that Leeds clearinghouse or whatever it's called, right? There's like basically a central place where you apply. It's for counseling, I actually don't know. I think you apply.
You apply direct to institutions for that.
Yes, so that would be more like a master's where I directly apply and I say, I want to, how is that for, so just for everyone to kind of, if you do clinical psychology, there's one place, the Leeds, I think it's Leeds Clearinghouse, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
And then there, for counseling, you would be directly apply to one program. For instance, City has a very good counseling program for the doctorate. How is it for educational psychology? Is it kind of like a central, or is it applying at a specific university?
Yes, so if you want to apply, I think I included the link a bit further up. It's the AEP, Association for Educational Psychologists. You go on there, sign up to them, and you can apply for up to 3 courses each year. And for the ones in bold there are the 4 London universities that offer the course, but there's, as you can see, lots of others around the country that offer that. But yeah, the AEP are the people that kind of process and manage all of the applications. And I think, well, it may not be as relevant for all of this, for everyone here today, unless you've had that experience and you're at the point where you are ready to start to apply. But I think the window for applications opens up in maybe September, October time, closes in December time. They have interviews in March, and then you find out by about April time each year.
Right, that sounds good. I'll check if this answered the question. So yeah, I think there's, I'm not sure that, Antonia, do you know how it is for forensic? I think forensic is also specific, more like and you have to do a master's.
Forensic's a bit different. I think that there are some masters in forensics, and some people are also doing professional doctorates in that at the moment, but in London I've only seen one for when people are actually working. So it's I think some people do the masters, then they apply to, you know, the prison service or wherever, and they get their job, and then I think some of them do this part-time professional doctorate at London Met. But just look that up on Prospects, everyone. You just go to www.prospects.ac.uk under F for forensic psychologist, and it would go through the training route for you. I thought your tips were great, Lawrence, about you know, look up for open days, educational psychology open days. Wonderful idea, joining an educational psychology Facebook group to find out more about people working in the field. And also, thanks very much for your offer. Any student listening who, you know, might like to just have a bit more of a chat or ask you some questions via LinkedIn, that's a great offer. Thanks very much.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, if I get lots of friend requests at once, I'm going to feel popular. But also, if I get too many requests for chats in one go, then we might have to stagger it over different evenings. But yeah, always happy to have a chat. And I think yeah, a couple of students have reached out in the past just to ask questions like that. I think I was on the walk to the supermarket, so I thought, yeah, let's have a chat. Why not?
Yes, I think last week, no, 2 weeks ago, we had longer discussions about Instagram, which are the Instagram accounts to follow for clinical psychology. Is there something? So, do you follow anyone on Instagram for educational psychology, or
Funnily enough, I deleted my Instagram today because I was just fed up with it. I just feel like I'm wasting my time.
Okay.
So I like, these dopamine hits in my brain. I'm like, oh God, I can't take it anymore. So
Okay.
I proudly deleted it today, but I'll probably download it in about 2 days.
On the weekend. Okay, that sounds good.
Exactly.
So don't get our students hooked. All right. I think we're.
There is an Instagram group though. Something like getting psyched. Oh, no, I can't remember actually. I won't even try to remember.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So a couple of final thoughts maybe before, if there's any more questions along the way. But I wanted to kind of share a memory that when I was in my undergraduate, I went to British Psychological Society, Psychology Society meeting at the university where I was at. And they talked about similarly becoming a different psychologist. This is the route you follow for this. This is the route you follow for this. And I remember sitting in that meeting thinking, wait, so I'd have to get a couple of years of experience and then 3 years and then qualify. Like, there's no way I'm going to do that. I can't, it seems too competitive, and it seems like there's too many people that want to do it. Everyone here in this room is probably going to apply, and it seems like too long a process. Forget it, I'm not going to do that. But I guess it kind of worked out along the way that I did go into this role. So it's kind of interesting that it worked out that way. But I think it worked out not because I had my sights set on it, but just because I came across it along the way. I had that experience working in schools, enjoyed it, worked as an assistant psychologist, enjoyed it, found out more about the course, seemed interested. So it kind of built up over time. Again, that's my own experience, but just in case anyone is sitting here wondering, there's no way I'm going to do that, then that was also my experience when I was in a psychology society meeting. And yeah, graduating from undergrad, what now? I think I definitely had a strong, I think I may even have mentioned before, like existential crisis. I don't know what to do. And I think that's probably a feeling that many people either have or are going to anticipate. And I guess I would just say it's okay to feel that way, because a lot of people will be feeling that way. And there are no kind of right or wrong answers as to what to do now. I think for me, certainly it's been a kind of muddling along the way to land into this position. And yeah, I mean, there are some days when I think, oh, this can be quite hard. I'm not sure about this, which is, very honest, and please don't tell my employers. But no, I mean, there are days when you have that with any job, I think, when you think, oh, this is really hard work. But then there are other days as well when you think, this is great. I really feel like I've made a difference. This is, this is great. So yeah, I think your thoughts can change over time. Certainly mine have. And I've definitely, lastly, got imposter syndrome still. And that's a theme running through the course. People are on a professional doctorate, but still there's this very strong sense of like, why did I get chosen for this course? How, am I going to be a good psychologist? These kind of things. Am I good enough to apply for the course? All throughout the training, even on the last day when someone was holding their thesis in their hands, they said, yeah, I don't know, I still feel like that imposter syndrome. After they'd passed their Viva, they'd submitted a thesis, still felt that. So I think still feel that in their jobs today. I still feel that in my job today sometimes, but I think that's all part of it, really. So
well, thanks for the honesty, Lawrence. I host loads and loads of panel events and individual events, and I think one of the things students value the most is honesty. Really honesty. Of course, in most jobs people have down days and difficult days, and as we're going on to questions, I wonder if I could start the students' question maybe quickly by saying, could you maybe share what you have found to be the most rewarding interaction you've had with a client or with a family so far? What's the most rewarding aspect of your job?
Trying to remember a specific moment. One, I should have prepared like a really great story.
It doesn't have to be a specific moment, or just what do you like the most about it?
I think what I like the most is just working with people and trying. I guess ultimately your role is to try to make meaningful change. ameliorate in some way. So I like that you have a lot of flexibility, a lot of autonomy, but ultimately you're hoping to make a difference. So it can be quite challenging, it can be quite complex. You can get caught up with different people's views that contrast with each other, and you're trying to manage a situation. There can be difficulties, parents don't agree with the school, but ultimately you're trying to work as a central figure to facilitate meaningful change. And when you feel like you've had an impact, that's a really nice, really rewarding thing. But no specific experiences are coming to mind at the moment.
Yeah, sure.
Right. Antonio, if I can jump in, I got one question. I think if I understand correctly, is it hard to find a job around this career? I'm not sure. I think maybe we could answer this in two parts, because I think for every chartered psychologist, there's a real funnel, and you have to get through that funnel. But once you got through it, you don't have to worry about jobs. That's kind of like for clinical counseling, forensic, any of these educational, it might be a little bit different beforehand. I'm not sure what was the question more about after or beforehand, but I think maybe you can like share your thoughts, Lawrence. But I feel like, yes, once you are a whatever education psychologist, we're here to talk about education psychologists, you don't have to worry about a job, right?
Yeah, spot on. I think as soon as basically the main job interview is getting onto the course, and once you're onto that, you're kind of set, really. That at least at the moment, that's the landscape where there is high demand for educational psychologists and relatively low supply. But the government have recently pledged to increase the training the training programs by about a third.
Yeah.
So there is yeah, I mean, it's much needed. I'm a member of the Association of Educational Psychologists, and every week we get vacancy updates, and most local authorities throughout the year will be posting vacancies, and there's always new ones each week around the country. So yeah, very much there is currently you're I wouldn't say guaranteed, because you do have to apply for jobs, but there is a lot of jobs available. I think everyone I know on my cohort of students I trained with, which is maybe 12 people, it's a quite small group, but yeah, every one of those who wants to be working right now is, and in like close to where they live.
Fantastic. Can I ask another question?
Yeah.
I think really good question, because in some sense, right, let's say I'm a student and I really like working with children. I really like being interested in learning disabilities, learning difficulties. But then and the question the student asks is basically, why not do it in a framework of the NHS or as a clinical psychologist? Why do it in a framework of kind of like an educational setting? So did you ever consider that? Is that something where you feel like, well, what's the biggest difference kind of like between the NHS clinical setting? I think in CAMS here, the person suggests you could do that. And working as an educational psychologist, similar, what is the right word? Disorders, difficulties, but different setting, right?
Yeah. Well, you said why not work as a clinical psychologist, and I'd say absolutely, why not? I think sometimes when you, in my experience, when I've kind of found myself in this role, it wasn't because I knew straight away that's what I wanted. It was something I figured out along the way. I'd had some experience working in education. I'd studied psychology. I was interested in applying psychology to educational contexts, and so went down that route. But yeah, I think clinical psychologists may do similar work, and sometimes you can find yourself that the kind of the Venn diagrams overlap in what your contribution is in a certain meeting or context, and so part of that is to kind of negotiate that, I suppose, in meetings you might have. But yeah, I mean, you're doing similar work. Ultimately, that is in the kind of helping and or healthcare professions. You're hoping to make a difference. So I would say I wouldn't say that educational psychology is the better profession. I think it's maybe better for me because it built more of my experiences. And so I would encourage everyone to research and think what it is that you want out of a job and what you want to spend your time doing. If you want to spend it more in schools or in hospitals, or well, but some clinical psychologists will work in schools too. So I'd say do research, get some experience, and figure it out along the way.
I think there's
figure out that you don't want to do it along the way. You might.
Yes, I think it's really important to know what you don't want to do. I did a 6-month placement on a crisis service, and thereafter I knew I don't want to do any of that. So I think there's a really nice follow-up question that I want to ask. I also just want to add that if you do clinical psychology, then in your doctorate, you will be on placements, and the placements, because it's NHS, are very restricted. So you will work with old people like me. You will work with on maybe a cancer unit for a while. You will work in basically all the stations. One of them will be with children. But if you really feel strongly about working with children, then you might want to do something that involves children all the time, and not just, I don't know, just the percentage. I think a nice suggestion was just here kind of, there's like maybe educational psychologists also work a little bit more preventative than just like as a clinical, you're more reactive. You're basically seeing people often like at their kind of really dire straits, and then if you might be more able to prevent things as an educational psychologist. Obviously, it's simplified, but I don't know, Lawrence, what do you think?
That is the hope. Sometimes the reality of everyday life, schools are busy, sometimes not always organized, can be that you get a phone call saying that a kind of emergency meeting needs to be called. But we try to sell, or I don't mean literally sell, but we try to offer our services to schools in that way, where we feel that putting kind of strategies preventative in prevention of any things that we think could be a problem later on is ideal. I don't, maybe I shouldn't really refer to it as a problem, but I think the idea is that, if we do some work and have some thinking now whilst we're not in crisis mode, then we can think deeply and carefully about that. But certainly maybe sometimes part of the role might be managing people who are in crisis mode and panicking and making quick decisions and trying to slow down the thinking and trying to unpick the situation and think about the way forward. So it can be a bit of both depending on the situation.
All right, I have two more questions. One question is about the doctorate, and I think it's a really good question. I mean, all of these questions are good. I don't know why I have to evaluate them. It's just, it's a teacher and me. So I don't know. Sorry, and it's basically about placements while you're on the doctorate. And I think the question's a little bit like, for instance, if you do a clinical doctorate, you're basically put into position, right? You can't choose, but you also don't have to apply, right? You're basically, this is your next stop. You're here for 2 months. This is your next. And then if you do counseling psychology, you basically design your own, and you have a team. For instance, when you do it here at City, there's a team of placement support workers. That's not the right word, but I think people will help you finding a placement. So how's it in educational psychology? If you're in the doctorate, do you have to find your own placements?
I think that it's a pretty good system in the educational psychology doctorate, and certainly I can speak from experience at the University of East London, yes, who are very well organised. In your first year, you are assigned a placement, one of 4 places. They have a relationship with 4 different local authorities around London. So you would ordinarily do your first year placement in one of those 4 places. In fact, one of them that the University of East London has is Islington. So I'm seeing some of the people who are studying on the course which I studied on coming through and having a placement there, which is nice. yeah, they will organize a placement for you in your first year, and then in your second and third years, you can organize a placement yourself, but you get a lot of support for that. There's a lot of placements available. Most London local authorities have placements available. There's a lot outside of London in the kind of London surrounds as well. So yeah, there's good opportunities for placements.
Yeah, I think there's one more, there are many questions coming in. I think one more specific question. I think it's basically, if I can reframe it a little bit, is about kind of like the minimum requirements, right? Just to kind of reiterate that the minimum requirement to get into the doctorate would be a BPS accredited course, which everyone here, because you're at City, has, then
Yep.
a year of experience with a degree in a relevant kind of like educational setting, and then you can apply. I think the question is like, also, I don't need any work experience. I think it's very hard since it's competitive. And I think, you want to test the waters a little bit first if you are interested in doing that. So it's good to kind of maybe experience school from the other side or experience educational settings from the other side before going into that. And it's also very hard to demonstrate that you really care for children, that you're interested in a job when you did not do anything for the last, like on top of that, than just the minimum requirements. I think if you want to set yourself apart, then you have to do that. It's not that it's like on the paper required, but I think, I don't know, like you can comment on that, Lawrence, maybe better, but I think it seems like hard to be in a competitive process and then you just fulfill the minimum requirements. Doesn't mean that this not works, but I'm just, right? Is that kind of a good summary?
Definitely. I would say that it's possible that if you've worked before, if you've met that minimum requirement before around working with children, young people, or in community and school settings previously, and then come to a degree, then perhaps if you would be drawing perhaps partly from your academic experiences at the university, but I'd say probably mostly that because you're a practitioner psychologist working with people, families, schools, they're interested in your experiences of doing that kind of being in that kind of setting previously and what you've learned from it, but also how you've been able to marry that with knowledge of psychology and how you might have applied that. Or maybe doing the course makes you realize the psychological thinking that you've learned, that you're kind of reflecting on, really thinking, oh, okay, I learned about memory, and maybe that young person's working memory, there were, that was one of the barriers for learning, something like that. So yeah, I would definitely kind of, I think after finishing a degree, I definitely had that sense of, what now? I need to get a job. What job? I want to do this. I should do this, and that can be quite stressful and all-consuming. And there can be that kind of expectation for yourself to get on that ladder and then be settled in a kind of career. But you're right, Andreas, there is that kind of almost like evidence gathering, like, do I want to work in schools? Do I want to work in doing this kind of work? Is it right for me? And the best way is to get kind of experience in those settings and do research on what the role involves, be interested in psychology and applying it to those contexts to know for yourself more than anything whether it's going to be right for you. So yeah, I think it's okay to do a bit of evidence testing, if we want to call it that, to go have experience in the world, in community and life settings, and see whether that's the route that you want to go down.
All right. I'm mindful of the time. If I can, kind of one quick fire question, then one I think really interesting question, and we might want to end it with that. I think one quick fire question. I think again, different doctorates. In a clinical doctorate, you get paid basically a monthly income, right? I think, and whether you're on placement or you are not on placement doesn't impact that. If you're on counseling, then you get paid by the placement. So if you're not, you get paid. I think educational is like clinical. You get basically a salary, kind of like a monthly income, or whether and it's the people that you apply for to get the placements, they don't pay you. It's basically the, who's paying this? Like the AE, like who's paying you? I think clinical is NHS, but who's paying you? Like, is it the local authorities or?
So yeah, so I'm not quite sure exactly how it works. I was just focused on is the money in my bank account when I was training, to be honest. But
All about the money.
my understanding is that in your first year, the university pays local authorities to take students because they're, essentially they're getting experience, and their contribution towards service delivery is less, perhaps because they're learning, rightfully so. And then in the second and third years, you operate more as a practitioner psychologist, but on a kind of reduced capacity amount. So then the placements then pay the university, pay the government, the university, I'm not really sure, but they pay someone, and then if somehow it gets given to you. So it's less of a direct monetary relationship, but my money always came from the university, and they paid it in every 4-month installments.
Oh, wow.
And I had to then therefore be more careful about managing my money, because I would sometimes have the tendency to get the money and then go and buy some cool stuff that I thought I needed, but then needed some food in the last few weeks.
Okay, could we add like last question? I don't think I'm not sure. Like Antonio, if you have another question.
Have we been through all the student questions?
There's one more question, but it's a bit bigger picture. But I think a really cool question.
Great.
If I become an educational psychologist, and then I feel like, I would rather influence larger policy questions. Can I do that? And I answered, oh, yes. But maybe, I think you're right, there's a way to kind of, if you feel like, oh, yeah, I would rather be involved in more kind of almost like a civil service role, there's a chance to do that, right?
That's an excellent question. I would say that it depends on how high you want to go, but educational psychologists are in quite a unique position that they go between different schools, so they get to see different contexts and how schools function. So yeah, you can certainly influence schools at a whole school level. I do a kind of piece of project work with a school where I'm trying to embed culture around supporting mental health and well-being. So I'm kind of having the impact on that school and that local environment there. But the question is more about the bigger picture and the policies. I think often educational psychologists may be involved in policy creation. I don't have as much knowledge or experience about how that works, but certainly some of the kind of documents that I might draw from around evidence-based practice around different interventions, they might be constructed alongside or with educational psychologists doing some of that research. Yeah, for example, I think the Education Endowment Foundation, they're a charity and they do a lot of work around evidence in education. I think they hire some educational psychologists. If the government does a review into special educational needs or into different kind of areas that affect education, they might draw from the knowledge of educational psychologists. I don't think there's a defined path for that, but I think the knowledge that you have from doing that role would allow you later on to find a way to get into working in policy, but it would be one that you'd have to kind of identify for yourself. But also I'm really pleased to hear that's the aspirations that someone has, to be trying to influence policy. And when we think about the decisions that are made by governments and making sure that there is some kind of beneficence and benevolence there that's informing that is key. So I support people who have aspirations to work in policy to affect meaningful change at the society level, as well as at the individual school and local authority level.
So I think one of the things I've learned from listening to you today, Lawrence, is the huge variety in your work, actually. So, the fact that you don't just, sit in a hospital, and have people coming in to see you, but actually for someone who likes, quite a lot of variety and getting out and about, you're visiting all sorts of different schools and pupil referral units, primary, even nursery, secondary. You're working with children, you're working with teenagers, you're working with parents, you're working with teaching professionals, and probably no doubt at multidisciplinary team meetings with speech and language therapists, physiotherapists, occupational therapists, pediatricians, etc. So I think it's been really great hearing about the variety of your role and the working week. I think very much the last question from me was, how emotionally demanding is it? Because a lot of students say to me, I'm interested in some kind of psychologist role, but I'm not sure I have what it takes emotionally. Would I find this too demanding in spite of professional training, so that you kind of put it away at the end of your working day? How demanding is it, and how much is mental health a part of working with these young people, dealing with things like depression and anxiety, low self-esteem, etc., as part of learning disabilities or behavioural issues?
That's a great question. I would say that in terms of supporting young people's mental health and well-being, that comes up a lot, and that's definitely a theme in the support that you provide to them, or that you provide to the carers that then who work with them the most on the most frequent basis. So you support them to support young people. So yeah, there are definitely some meetings which are a lot more emotionally charged. There are some meetings where or I should say consultations, to be a more official psychological term. But yeah, there are definitely some consultations where there are disagreements. Some, I've had times when parents were quite anxious about what being involved with a psychologist meant, and felt maybe that a referral that had been made to our service by the school meant that they were being stigmatized, and were quite upset. And yeah, I think I thought, well, fair enough. If that's not been communicated to you about what the purpose of my involvement is, and you're in a meeting room and there's a new person who you've not met before who's asking questions about your child, then that's going to feel probably quite anxiety inducing. And sometimes people will be angry as a way of kind of coping with that situation, especially if there's a lot that's gone on in the background prior to that you don't always know about, that's informed their anger and frustration. So definitely, yeah, it can be emotionally charged. And I would say when I was doing the role before the pandemic, I think that was personally easier to manage. I think that there is a lot of professional supervision that you get from your colleagues, from your kind of designated supervisor who you meet with on a usually every 2 to 3 weeks when you're training. It's on a very frequent basis. But yeah, that's easier to manage, and you can kind of have those like swivel chair moments. You turn around to your colleagues and be like, yeah, I went to this school today and I had this like weird situation. What do you think about this? And then you can kind of talk it through. But that's a lot harder to do in the remote capacity, where I'm in my tiny North London flat now, and if I want to have a quick swivel chair conversation, then I have to call up one of my colleagues who's probably in a meeting. I have to check their calendar and all that stuff. So it's not as incidental. So I think, much like everyone, I think it's definitely impacted my mental health working remotely. It's harder to do our work remotely. I feel like it has less impact remotely. So yeah, it's tough. And there have been some days.
Looking forward to it ending. So the end is in sight, at least. Yeah.
The roadmap.
Yes. Speaking of the end is in sight, Lawrence, thank you so much. It's not the happiest. Yes, I should become like a radio disc jockey or something. Speaking of, okay, thank you so much, Lawrence. Really, really wonderful. Learned a lot. And yes, I would stop the recording. Would thank Antonia for helping me connect with you.
Good
Lawrence.
for LinkedIn.
Yes, LinkedIn, where old people meet. Yeah, this is like where we all meet each other. Fantastic, so much. Thank you so much, Antonia. Thank you so much, Lawrence, for doing this. It was really, really good. I see it in the chat. The students appreciate it. And I will stop the recording.
Hey.
Bye, everyone.